Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 4 of PGIM India Mutual Fund presents Live Mint, Amend, Adjust, and Adapt. This is a series of high-powered panel discussions that we have been doing to try and figure out the success mantras for the new normal in the post-COVID world. And if, like me, you're wondering when the post-COVID world is coming, I'm afraid that we don't have a clear answer to, but we can try and tell you how to cope, and that's what we've been trying to do here. Today, in this particular episode, we're going to take a look at leadership in these turbulent times, both leadership and how you can motivate yourself. You know, leadership and motivation. Who could need leadership and motivation more in a situation like this than sports people? I mean, the world is, for the rest of us, work still continues, work from home. But how are world champion sports people going to be working from home when they can't play with anybody? We don't know when the championships are going to start. The Tokyo Olympics would have happened by now, and it hasn't. So clearly, they face a lot of challenges.
Yes, of course. I think for us in sport, for many of them at least who have played the highest level, day in and day out, it's always sport, a lot of travel, a lot of tournaments. And the only time you get is from injuries. This time, the initial, say, a month of the breakdown or the lockdown is when the players would think that, okay, it's a time to recoup and get better. But as time goes on, it was possible that somebody could take it both ways. Somebody could use the lockdown and the rest to recoup and get better for the future, or somebody could actually get panicky and break down. So for many of the top players, I would think it's been a break because some of them have played, say, 10 years of badminton continuously. And the only time they took a break was injury. But since this was something without an injury, they've been able to work harder. Although it was difficult at home and competing was difficult, playing was difficult. But actually, since badminton is such a physical sport, many of them have actually taken the time out to get physically and mentally stronger, and across the world. And I think that's been something which I'm actually in a way happy for the players.
Okay, fantastic. Let's come back to you in a couple of minutes. But Mr. Sabharwal, is the team a team being able to come together? How are you talking to them? What are you doing to motivate them? And how do you think leadership should be displayed at a time like this?
No, I think the most complicated part is, a leader is a dealer in hope, but hope is not a strategy. And we all are sort of, as you said, it's unmodelable. We don't know whether we are at the start, middle, or end of the virus, and that makes planning really hard. But, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. I mean, digital learning has been brought from 2030 to 2020 in 90 days. Digital payments, their destiny has been brought forward. So some of our businesses are really benefiting from the digitalization super cycle. So my sense is that, modern science will end in 90 days or 180 days or 365 days. I don't think it's going longer than that. So all we can do is make sure that real capital and real talent are allocated to our biggest opportunities. And it's that sort of, as Pulela said, that, his team is getting mentally and physically fitter than they have ever been. That's what companies like us are using this time of reflection and stepping back to sort of reallocate capital and talent to our biggest opportunities.
When someone like you is managing a huge group like the Aditya Birla Group, what is it that you're telling people? What are you telling your employees? Are you recognizing the fact, for example, that certain areas are going to bounce back really fast or maybe even do better? Others will take much longer to come back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vikram, for having me on the show. So if you look at the construct of the GDP of the various countries, you look at services being a very big chunk. So India's services is about 55%. Okay, now industry is about 30, and then agriculture is about 15. So now you look at, if you're not able to go out, you're not able to fly, you're not able to have tourism, all the issues around services, those industries will take quite some time to come back. They might come back 2-3 years later, not right now. But one thing this has taught us is that in every business, I think a digital business model is a default business model. And a digital business model, I simply state as the shortest distance between the brand or the producer to the consumer and the least frictionless path. These are the two things I will say. So I think every business has to reorient itself to say, we have to be digital first today. So I would advocate that, I would tell every leader, I think you need to do two things. You need to have a microscope to exploit what you're good at and really look out 21 months with a telescope to say, put a team to say, what can we do better?
Do you agree with what Shiv and Manish and Pullela were all saying, that yes, that there are some fundamental differences that now have to be internalized, and leadership means not necessarily looking back to the past and saying, but that's the way it used to be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years ago. Because you could argue that even 1 year, 2 years, 3 years ago, these changes were always going to happen. You were always going to go digital. You would always end up having conversations like this on video conference and not think twice about them. We were always going to do it. It's just that this has accelerated the process and perhaps needed a reversal.
Yeah, absolutely, Vikram. I completely agree to that. And I think that, as you mentioned, there have been fundamental changes in the way business is being organized and people are working. And I think one of the most fundamental things there is what we've realized is the old command and control structure and the hierarchies that we've built in organizations. In this pandemic, for instance, given India's diversity and the federal structure, the locking and unlocking has been not synchronous across the country, and therefore local teams in different places have had to really step up and be given direction as to what to do, rather than setting all the direction only from the top. So I think one fundamental aspect I see changing is the whole attitude towards the command and control structure and the hierarchy, and working as Mr. Shivkumar said, in a far more collaborative way with your teams as well as your other stakeholders, on the ground.
On the battlefield, as you know, as a leader, you have got to motivate from the front. You've got to display a certain amount of courage, perhaps. You have to be decisive. You have to inspire your men to follow you into, virtually face the odds. And if the leadership is bad, the result of the battle can be very different. I mean, again, let's just take an army example. Look at 1962. And the army didn't change that much. 5 years later in 1967, and then 9 years later in 1971, a totally different result. And you could argue that things were not, okay, the equipment wasn't quite as good and blah, blah, blah. But you could argue it had a lot to do with the leadership at a high level and also on the ground. What was 7th Brigade doing at Namchak, whatever it is. You could debate that the leadership is what was really made the difference. The fighting men were the same in both cases.
Well, I don't want to get into those specific examples because in hindsight, you can argue and paint any situations, anything. And you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, it is the leadership to be blamed for anything and everything. So even if equipment is not there, that also is the leader's fault. You can't say the 62 battle was not, because that is also the leader's fault. So eventually, when success happens, the leaders claim the success. When failures happen, they have to claim the accountability of failure. So there is no debate on that. And at the strategic level, there is no room for bravado. In the strategic level, there is no room to say, but it took that, let's go there. There is no room for that. In the strategic level, you have to be very, very astute. You have to be analytical. You have to forego certain battles, victory to win the overall war. You can't be fighting for the media or for a 5 o'clock briefing every evening. You have to be looking at 5 generations ahead in terms of, will you incapacitate a country in such a way that it is incapable of being an enemy in the future, even if that incapacitation means cooperation with that enemy. So that's strategic thinking. Now, you cannot have the traits of one level automatically move to the next level. And, that's why you find many young captains who may be great as operational leaders may not be such good strategic leaders, because certain situations require aim, they require ready, fire, and then aim. They require that. They require you to be prophylactic. And certain other situations require you to be very, very nuanced. And I think as the level goes up, the elements of leadership also change. And I think that's very important to understand.